Good. So here's the problem. Your mind doesn't know how to do what your body knows how to do. Your mind is a problem-solving engine. And when you get in there under high-performing things and you're telling yourself not to, or you're having thoughts that are showing up telling you how to, if you don't have the skill of putting the problem-solving mind on a leash, and the name for it in the psychological flexibility is fusion, then you don't have the ability to come into the present moment and allow the game to come to you and allow your body to do what it has been trained to do.
Welcome to the Performance Psychology Podcast, Season 1, Episode 1. In today's episode, I'm interviewing Professor Stephen C. Hayes. Stephen is an absolute legend within the world of psychology. He's the Foundation Professor of Psychology for the University of Reno, Nevada, and having written nearly 50 books and over 600 scientific articles, he's one of the most cited researchers in the world. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the conversation. So I'd like to welcome Stephen Hayes. So thank you so much for joining us and giving us, I know you're a busy man, so thank you for spending some time with us, Stephen.
Well, it's awesome to be here with you. I mean, I've watched from afar what you're trying to do, and I'm happy to support the work.
Yeah, thank you. It's much appreciated. For those who are kind of watching and may not be familiar with your work and the acceptance and commitment therapy and the psychological flexibility model that underpins it, would you mind just giving us a brief rundown of how the model works and what it is, and maybe how it applies to in a sporting context?
Sure, and actually for this purpose, we should probably call it acceptance and commitment training, because it's really not, yes, it's used as a psychotherapy, but it's also used just to try to, live your life in a way that's fuller and more able to do what you are trying to do. So it's entering into the performance world, support, not just that, business and so on, high performers of all kinds, military, etc. Because it turns out that the underlying processes that take you into some sort of mental health cul-de-sac can also take you into mental and behavioral and life prosperity. So what's inside the ACT work? I mean, what's different about it is that we've spent the 40 years or so to try to hack the human mind and try to figure out how to distill down the processes of change, actual things you do in the area of emotion and thought and attention, motivation, sense of self, overt behavior, that we've tried to dig down to what are the actual processes that open things up or close things down. So ACT is just a name for putting things in as an intervention that are designed to move those processes that create more psychological flexibility, which if you wanted to define that in a 2-sentence long paragraph, or maybe I can say it in a single sentence, it's learning to step back a little bit from the kind of evaluative chatter in your head and to show up to your history with what your body's doing, what your emotions doing, what your memories are doing, and then to come into the present moment inside and out in a way that's flexible, fluid, and voluntary and conscious. That part of you that's behind your eyes is showing up here, and then to move your attention towards what are the qualities of being and doing, the qualities of actual living that you want to put into your next moment, and how do you build habits around that? There's 6 things inside that long paragraph. You can chunk it into 3, being more open, aware, and actively engaged, or you can just say being more psychologically flexible. And they work like that. There's 6 things, but it's really 3, but it's really 1. Kind of in the way like a box has 6 sides, but if you take out a couple sides, you don't have a box anymore. And so, if you just look at the side, cut it out, throw it on the floor, you wouldn't know it's a box. It's just a square. But in the same way, these things I'm talking about in isolation are not that helpful necessarily. Probably won't hurt you. But when you put them all together, there's something powerful that happens. And turns out that includes in sport and performance.
I've seen just kind of huge positive effect on um, not only myself and my coaching and how I deliver and how I step up to the challenges of coaching, but also in the students that I coach. And I've kind of been really interested in that psychological flexibility model for the last 6 or 7 years. And I've certainly felt the benefit of it. And I think I'd really be interested to hear your thoughts on why it's become so much more popular. We've really had, I think, for the last 20 years or so, this positive psychology, this feeling confident and feeling relaxed to perform. What do you think would be the pitfalls that can be involved with that? Kind of peacocking yourself to performance and
There's a lot of things out there that can be useful in some contexts. It's not that people are coming up with crazy ideas, they actually are helpful to a degree sometimes. But they sometimes walk you right onto the edge of something that can become negative. So let's take something like positive psychology and maybe even take it over into affirmations, repeating, positive self-statements about yourself. Turns out when you really dig inside that, it works pretty well as long as life is going pretty well. But suppose it's not going well. Suppose your mental performance is deteriorating, anxiety, depression, etc. is showing up. There's some sort of urge or addiction. There's some sort of cul-de-sac you're in. Under those conditions, saying positive things and focusing on positive things sometimes can actually pull the exact opposite. And next thing you know, you're arguing with yourself and you're doing stuff that you knew, even when you were 4 years old and watching a Disney cartoon with Goofy on one shoulder and horns and Goofy on the other shoulder with a halo. And next thing you know, you're having an argument and you're missing your putt, or you let the puck by you on the ice or whatever. You're off into some sort of mental struggle. So you mentioned the word confidence. Just slow it down, look at the etymology of it. Yeah, who wouldn't want to feel confident? We all want to feel confident. Of course we do. But what does that word actually mean? It means with faith or fidelity. Con means with, Latin for with. Fident comes from fides, the Latin word for faith. So are you acting in fidelity with yourself when you notice something that you don't like at the level of feeling, you say, oh, I have to get rid of that and put this other feeling there. Wait a minute. What you mean is there's something wrong right now, number one. Number two, you're saying your feelings don't have room. There's no room in your psychology for your own feelings or memories or history or doubts or, and we're carrying with us, all of us, a failure. We're carrying betrayal. We're carrying insecurities. Well, what was if you thought of confidence as a behavior, not just as the emotional exhaust that comes from the behavior, what would be the most with fidelity thing to do if you have a history that includes failure, betrayal, loss, pain, etc., which we all do? Well, it'll be learning how to carry that. And so I'm all down to confidence, but I want to do confidence the behavior, not confidence the feeling. Because if you do it cattywampus, if you do feeling first, behavior second, that's great so long as you can kind of keep it going. And then as soon as things really aren't going well, it actually makes it worse. It starts mocking you. Oh, look how confident you are. Look at what you just did. I mean, Goofy with the horns is right up in your ear, telling you 1,001 ways that you failed yet again. You're not going to be able to do it. The first time an athlete has to sit on the bench who's a high performer, or gets into a losing streak who's a high performer, or, you got to watch out. So I don't want to be critical of these other things. Sometimes they're helpful. We've done research. I'm sorry for going on, but we've done research inside our lab where we've used the kind of things that coaches sometimes tell to do to focus on form, distract yourself if painful things show up. And, if it turns out if you're dealing with, for example, athletes who don't have much skill, some of that can actually be helpful. As soon as you get to athletes that have a substantial amount of skill, it starts working the other way. It's actually taking them off being able to do what they've programmed their body to do with hundreds and hundreds of hours of training. And really, it's more a matter of moving the mind to the side and allowing that training to be channeled through in your performance. So I think that's part of what happens with coaches is that, earlier on in their career with certain, beginning athletes, et cetera, some of these things work, focus on your form, et cetera. Next thing you know, you're telling high level focus to people to focus on their form, and now they're talking to themselves and not letting their body do what it knows how to do. And your mind doesn't know how to make the putt, it doesn't know how to hit the ball, it just doesn't. It's like telling a home run hitter to I'm thinking about this with my Blue Jays shirt on, because they've got mental performance coaches in the Blue Jays who are ACT folks. It's like telling a person who does not hit a home run, that the ball has a parabolic shape when it leaves the bat. Yeah, great. That's not going to make you hit the ball any better. Yogi Berra's don't just hit. But, that's bad advice too. Don't think, turns out. Then you have to think about not thinking. And next thing you know, you're thinking. So it's tricky. The mind is tricky. And the hack that we've done allows us to come in with advice that's more reliable and pays off in the long run, plus the short run. And so you can do things where you're more certain that you're giving people a foundation they can work from.
So what part of the model, because that was one of the biggest when I told people about, what would you like me if you could just kind of ask a message while I'm talking to Steve? And what would that message be? And without doubt, that number one thing that came through was how do I, or why do I perform, why can I perform so well when the pressure's not on?
Yeah.
And then as soon as it counts, I can't get out of my own way. And this is when, things they've just done well for weeks and weeks and weeks, all of a sudden the performance just kind of drops away.
Okay.
So what part of the psychological flexibility model is that?
Well, it's several things, but probably the big thing is to allow some of the precursors of an emotional response to show up and just be there. Like you can sense the arousal, you can sense the importance. If you make this, you might actually win that tournament. That's something. And the evaluative problem-solving mind kicking in with what if you don't, or don't miss it to the left, or and as soon as you're doing that, you're actually starting to move around your body. There's a kind of a brilliant piece of work with suppressive thoughts and the effect on your body. And the way that this went was the task was to hold a plumb bob over a point on the floor. And the instruction was just stand there and hold it and don't let it move. But then here's what was added. And for gosh sakes, don't let it go left and right. That would really be bad. If it goes forward and back, okay, but left and right would be, well, of course, what happens? We all know this. If you've ever been up on a really, really tall building or at the edge of the Grand Canyon or something like that, you got a little guardrail, but you could easily tumble over that sucker. It's only up about 36 inches. You could easily tumble over. And you're having the thought of, I got to be careful not to lean forward, right? Well, what do? You activate by that thought, the muscles that pull you back. But then you start falling back and then you lean forward. And next thing you know, you're rocking, standing on the edge of a freaking cliff. And you say, what am I wanting to jump? Or something? No, it's that you're suppressing, you're trying to push out thoughts that say, don't. You're looking at a guy who's little league batting average. My dad was a professional ball player, threw out his arm and lived a tragedy of an athlete who never could live his dream, but, drafted by the Cincinnati Reds, threw no hitters in high school, one after the other. It was an amazing pitcher. Yeah. And, when you get into that world of competitive athletes and what they have at stake and so forth, how could you not have thoughts crowding in of what would happen if, and if you're trying not to have those thoughts, you're actually activating the very processes that get in the way of your training, your programming, your ability to actually accomplish these high level athletic things. And the story I was going to tell is Little League. It was prohibited for the teams to do this because it's so cruel. But the real little ones, when they're learning to hit, if you say swing, they'll swing. If you say don't swing, they'll still swing. So, so you'd have like other players on the team, say swing, and then they got scolded for that. So they say don't swing, it still would work because, in the domain of swinging, it puts you into a place where, instead of waiting for the ball and, those rules interfere. Can I take another minute to tell a little league story?
Yeah, of course.
Because my dad was competitive, I really wanted to be a good ball player, and I was horrid, just horrid. But one reason I was horrid was he took me to see Richie Ashburn, a major league ball player, played for the Philadelphia Phillies. I was born in Philadelphia. My dad was a Phillies fan his whole life. So I'm sitting there as like an 8-year-old or something, in some sort of, father-son kind of thing, listening to this famous, now retired major league ball player. And he's talking about how you have to snap your wrists right before you hit the ball, which is true. Here's what I thought it meant. You should go like that. Well, if you do that, the ball is going to go underneath the bat because you're rolling the bat. That is not snapping your wrist. Well, the reason I got like about a batting average approximating 0, because all I could do is hit grounders, is I was following a rule that I heard when I was 8 years old with my dad about how I'm supposed to do it. And a good coach could have caught it, but didn't. And it wasn't until I was, after college playing softball when I finally realized what I was doing and I learned how to hit a ball. So here's the problem. Your mind doesn't know how to do what your body knows how to do. Your mind is a problem-solving engine. And when you get in there under high-performing things and you're telling yourself not to, or you're having thoughts that are showing up telling you how to, if you don't have the skill of putting the problem-solving mind on a leash, and the name for it in the psychological flexibility is fusion, then you don't have the ability to come into the present moment and allow the game to come to you and allow your body to do what it has been trained to do. And so in practice, you're nailing it. And then in performance, you're trying to muscle it because you're trying to overwhelm the logical problem-solving mind and the emotional temptation. But are we training our athletes to be mental performers at the same level that we're training them to be physical performers? No, because more often we're training them on mental performance ideas that are not vetted well in the lab, that are not based on good science. And a lot of the sports psychology stuff, when we take what coaches are told to do, distractions being one of the worst, and then what we say to do, it's night and day. I mean, that advice can be helpful, but often it's not, and it's dangerous, and you'd be better just to shut up. But coaches are paid to say stuff, so they say stuff they know, and often it's not scientifically sound. Sorry for going on so long.
But, no, that's great. I really enjoyed it. I mean, I certainly found from my own, small amount of time in the spotlight of reasonably high performance, that those more traditional ideas of, as you say, distraction or trying to feel more confident. So the feelings first, behavior second.
Right.
route to it was just exhausting, just absolutely exhausting mentally. And so often I'd get in my own way from, again, that same situation that so many of my kind of clients face of performing beautifully in practice and then stepping up and
Well, and
getting too much in their own heads. And
yeah, and here's an example of one where the psychotherapists and the behavior change folks over here have had an effect on the performance world in a way that's harmful, I think. And I'm going to say something to my colleagues. I'm kind of a cognitive behavior therapy guy. I'm part of that community, but I have a lot of ideas out of the mindfulness and acceptance and ACT wing that's different. Well, the traditional cognitive idea and cognitive behavior therapy is the biggest, most empirically supported, mental health thing out there, is that you have to catch cognitions that you don't like, and you have to sort of detect them, challenge, dispute them, and change them. Yeah, but when you do component analyses, when you do process analyses, that's not why CBT works. Cognitive behavior therapy, it's mixed in with lots of behaviorally wise advice. And yeah, mental flexibility is great. And people will sometimes do not detect, challenge, dispute, and change, but something more like, well, in addition to thinking that, you can also think this. What does that have? Well, you separate back a little bit from your thoughts. And early on in CBT, there's this thing called distancing to teach you, because they want you to notice the thoughts so that you can challenge and change them. Challenge and change is a bad idea. It focuses your attention exactly where you don't want to focus, which is on your goofy thoughts. It is a far safer thing to do, which is to take that move back, that distancing move, and then allow yourself to really uh, uh, step away from analytical, judgmental stuff if it's not helpful to you. And so we've put into the cultural stream process ideas that are based on methods that have good outcomes that are not themselves understood in terms of the processes. So the thing I said at the beginning, what we bring to the table that's different is the 40-year effort to dig down to process and to hack the human mind. And we have made enough progress there that I can say, there's a lot safer way to deal with the judgmental mind than detect, challenge, dispute, and change. Just don't even play with that, because you're right on the edge of a cliff. And so I feel for these kids, who are wanting to be high performers, and they're actively getting advice. They know they need to get their mind and body lined up. They know they have to be at their game, both with mind and body. But the science of how to do the physical things is so much more solid than the science of how to do the mental things. And so you're told to do bad things, and it blows up on athletes all the time. And then they crash and burn around not just the performance, but also, getting into cul-de-sacs of anxiety, depression, substance use, not knowing how to deal with their girlfriend dumping them or whatever. I mean, just look at the not knowing how to recover from an injury, not having to know how to deal with, being put on the bench or whatever. So it's time for sports psychology to catch up with what's happening with processes of change inside evidence-based methods. And there's more data on processes of change inside the ACT world than any other single psychological intervention in the world, by far, in my opinion. And I've actually done the research to find that. So focus on process and see where it takes you in terms of outcome.
And I'm certainly seeing the kind of ACT mindfulness, ACT-based approach is becoming much more popular in sports psychology, and I'm seeing these conversations popping up more and more often. And it almost seems like the conversations are a bit like there's a kind of a fresh air, it's a breath of fresh air compared to the more traditional approaches, which, as you're explaining, have some potential issues behind them. So I'm certainly kind of tapping into that from a coach's point of view and seeing the benefits with clients and students, and so on and so forth. But just coming back into the kind of one of the other big things that people, I suppose, struggle with is the mental challenges of improving and just developing skills and getting better. Um, how do you see how, I suppose, you could describe how actors being able to kind of step up, help people step up to those challenges? But certainly in a sporting context, hopefully this can help people as well.
Well, some of the way that ACT might help is just to tap into sources of motivation that are not so external and that are more intrinsic, and they don't go up and down as much, and allow you to that long trajectory you need to develop a skill at a very, very high level, and to do it in a way that's kind to you and doesn't produce burnout and so forth. I mean, how many competitive athletes at a high level have crashed and burned around basically burning out on what they're doing? They're trying to muscle themselves into success and being motivated sometimes by things that can easily abandon them. I mean, if you're motivated by fame, fame can bite you on the rear end. For one thing, it comes and goes. For the other thing, you've got, I look at these high level athletes with people around them wanting to milk them like a cow, wanting, whether it's the groupies or the agents or whatever, I mean, and the adulation. And next thing you know, the critical stuff from the columnists are stirring things up and digging things in, and your own social media too much. And then next thing you know, you're not focusing on what it is you need to do. So if you can tap into a source of motivation that is kinder, gentler, but also more intrinsic and there for you, and the values conversations really, really help on that. The way it's talked about, you have to be very careful, because values easily can turn into a wagging finger, and you have to have the other flexibility skills in order to embrace values the way we mean it. We don't just mean goals. We don't just mean what you want. What we mean is by choice, which means with your mind out here like this, not up here like this. So with your diffusion skills, so that you can notice what your mind's doing and there's still a human being there able to make a choice. With emotional openness, you're just not run by your fears and your history and your successes and failures. Here, present in the context, where you are consciously, by choice, what are the intrinsic qualities that you want to bring to this? And a way that the Blue Jays coaches are talking, they're finding ways to reach these young men, trying to learn how to be high performers. They're drafted, they're in there, they're in those system, they may not yet be on the major league roster, but they have a phrase they call it living your legacy. And you think about that, like, what would you like to leave behind as an athlete? And some of it might be things like helping a teammate. It might be things like being a good model for people who do look up to you. It might be things like having enough of balance in your life that when your career does end, it'll land in a way that will support you as a whole human being, that you'll know something about relationships and love and children and contribution. And it may mean really being able to be all that you can be as kind of an exercise of excellence. And we say that, what competitive athletics allows you to do is to kind of enter into what, after all, is a game. All these sports are games. What does that mean? It means we pretend as though those outcomes are of importance in order for us to have the joy of building competence. And it started really early on. And you just watch 3-year-olds. I bet you I can get over there before you touch me. And they're running as fast as their little legs will carry them. I mean, there's so much joy and life and vitality in getting to that tree before you touch me. And, often that's what brought competitive athletes into sport. And they want to channel that. They want to have the joy of a vital connection to competing at a high level, to learn and to have it be about something. They want to be a good winner. They want to be a good loser. They want to be, as kind of a metaphor for life. And people say that, they say, and it is, because like the game of having fewer golf strokes than you had yesterday, or the game of, hitting the ball over the fence. How is that different than the game of being a good dad or the game of being a really good husband? It's not that different. And so values held the way ACT folks hold it is this voluntary creation of intrinsic meaning in your behavior, of living that legacy, being the person you want to be. I don't mean objectify, I mean reflecting in your actions how and who you want to be in life. And if you do that broadly enough, competitive athletes can have the kind of mental excellence they need to be physically excellent. If you don't have both of them, your physical excellence can actually almost mock you, because you get to a place where you just don't know how to handle success or failure. And we see it in the sports pages all the time of XYZ person crashing and burning out.
Can I let you in on a little kind of performance trick that I do, which you just really reminded me of, actually, with the story of the kids. So when I'm performing, because I still play some competitive tournaments and whatnot, and when I'm performing, I've got this very, very strong memory of my youngest son, who at the time was probably 5, 6 years old, and I've got this very strong memory of him just singing when we were on holiday. And I play this little game with myself where whenever I go to putt in a tournament, I put myself behind his eyes. And it's not so much because he had that, that enthusiasm and that joy and that excitement for the task, and it was just, can I get this ball into the hole with this club? It's more, yes, it is that. That's fun and that's a nice thing to feel, but it's more because he was just so engaged in what was in front of him. And that kind of that single task focus, and kind of as I put myself behind his eyes, my performances, I've been doing it for about a year, and my performances have just been,
I love that. Getting
better and better.
Well, and one of the ways we do values work in ACT, there's 4 major ways in, take pain, flip it over. What does that tell you what you care about? Thinking about times where you've spelled especially connected, joyful, vital, etc. in a domain. Look inside that, you'll find your values. Pick a hero, pick a guide, pick somebody who showed in some way something that you want to bring to this moment. And then authorship. How do you want to write your story? How do you want to, well, what you're doing with perspective taking is you're tapping into that sort of joyful innocence of competence one moment at a time that we all had, or we would not have learned to walk. We would not have learned to grab that object and put it in our mouth. We would not, we come into the world without competence at almost anything. And we were able to do these magnificent things, if you think about it, of kind of, language and reasoning and walking and doing spectacular things that, you just wonder, how is it even possible? My wife and I, my wife's Brazilian, we were at the Rio Olympics, and we couldn't get all the tickets we wanted, but we could get some. And one of them was some sort of trampoline gymnastics I'd never seen before. And you're looking at these people doing like double back twisting before they, I'm thinking they're going to land on their head. No, they're going to exactly the last second land on their feet. just enough to go another 3-story building tall to do a whole nother series of things. I mean, what an incredible animal we are. What an amazing creature we are. Isn't that magnificent? I mean, there's no other creature on the planet that would spend like years and years and years to do something like that. And it is the same well from which we're able to do good science or good teaching or good parenting or, good anything. So athletes are looked up to for a reason, because we see in their journeys the drama and the challenge of the hero's journey that everybody's on, of not feeling capable, not having confidence, not knowing what to do, having those dark nights of the soul, and yet with your friends, with your allies, with this inner sense of self that can move you forward, finding a motivation and spending the time to be able to defeat the evil wizard or grab the golden fleece or put that 32-foot putt into a cup. What a crazy thing, that you would even be able to do that, to be able to read those grass blades and the little gust of wind and how much moisture is still in the little, I mean, just crazy. So, and joyful and wonderful, and a challenge for high performers, because part of your mind wants to turn it into a do or die moment. By doing what you just did, you turned it into a vital life moment.
One of the really interesting kind of spin-off changes that I hadn't anticipated was the changing relationship with fear of failure. Because what I saw in my youngest son is, if he saw the ball miss, then his eyes lit up because it meant he got another go. So when I was getting these thoughts of what if I miss, when I was behind his eyes, there was actually more of an excited feeling, because I get to go again. I get to try again. And I think you said it perfectly. It kind of really taps into that kind of competence one moment at a time.
Yeah. It's a joyful journey, and what a privilege. I mean, athletes who actually get paid to do that, and they're competitive athletes, what a privilege. You get to play games and get paid. And I know how, I don't want to say that in a way that's invalidating. I know how hard that is. And I've worked with competitive athletes, and there's a joyful place in here. Joyful, not necessarily, maybe a better way would say a vital place here, a fully alive place here, where success and failure are part of the one thing of putting yourself on a trajectory to increase your competence, that one tiny, tiny little bit. We're at the very high level. We're talking about fractions of fractions of fractions that are the difference between you and the person next to you. And part of that is mental performance. So, we better get that part of our game dialed in, if we really want to perform at that level. So ACT is spreading through the sports community because of the bottom line. I mean, there's measures of NHL hockey players where points per minute on ice can be predicted by psychological flexibility self-report. I mean, and I'm not a big fan of self-report. It's easy to, but, when I was at Rio and watching, I was also watching people win gold medals with ACT coaches. And some household names. If I said them out loud, you'd know them, but it's not, I can't, because I know who the coaches, and it's just not something that I can breach confidentiality. But, I visited China not too long ago, man, they got ACT coaches all over their Olympic team, or the Swedish hockey team, or the UK rowing team, and on it goes. And it's for bottom line reasons. It's that tiny little edge, can make a difference. And I'm rooting for the Blue Jays. They're still in the game. They lost 2. I haven't looked today to see how they did. I'm going to have a meeting with Ben Freakley, who's the head of the mental performance coaches for the Blue Jays. And I know for sure, I know absolutely for sure, I don't know bottom line for the baseball team, but I know for sure some of those athletes are really buoyed up by the help it's given them and walking through their rehab and injury, and sitting on the bench and being able to throw fully after that Tommy John surgery, and all the crazy things we ask these young people to do without putting them through any kind of mental performance training that's necessarily science-based, unless they're lucky enough to have coaches who know how to do that. And the Blue Jays are.
You mentioned a word earlier, which you said was part of that psychological flexibility model of fusion, when, as I understand it, being kind of overly caught up in what the mind's saying. So how might this kind of land within the model if a golfer, for instance, is really up in them, their thoughts and feelings around what if I do this? I might embarrass myself, and what if I mess this up, and this is where it counts. What might be a way that they can loosen that grip and free up their attention?
Well, there's a whole lot of diffusion methods that are out there, and I'd like to sort of suggest that people try them and allow them to, to see what works. I actually did a TEDx talk just on diffusion methods. So if people Google my name, I've done 2 TEDx talks. One called How to Turn Pain into Purpose, or something like that, which is kind of my life story. And then there's another one called Mental Breaks, Avoid Mental Breaks. Mental breaks, being able to put a brake on the analytic judgmental mode of mind, helps us keep from a place where we can actually break. And I gave that talk in front of a high school here at my university of Nevada, that is only for students who have IQs at the 99.9 percentile or above. They're freaking geniuses. Yeah, but that means they're feeding that logical judgmental mode of mind, and they're no better off in terms of anxiety, depression, substance use, if anything else, they may be at risk. And so I walked through about 12 different things. I'll give you a tiny little one, just a couple of. Give that part of your mind a name. Just give it a name. And when you're coming up on that point that it starts telling you what to do, thank it very much. Thank you, George. Thank you for the advice. And I've got this covered. And come back to that moment. Not to dismiss or diss or push away or criticize, but it would be very much, like if you had the kids in the back seat telling you how to drive. I've got this covered. You're not going to turn your driving over to a 5-year-old. And this judgmental part of you that will attach you to fear of failure, or tell you, for God's sakes, don't hit it to the right. Okay, you just activated the muscles that would go right. You now have the opponent muscles holding it back, and now you're rocking at the top of the Empire State Building. This is not a good thing you want to do before a putt. And, don't slice. This is not what you want to do. So give it a name. Another one might be to hear it in a funny voice. Pick a voice. You can pick a cartoon character, a politician you're not fond of, anything that will help you get a little bit of a separation. So yeah, I've got this voice, and it's kind of like the Wizard of Oz pulling the curtain aside and realizing that big gigantic head that's telling you it's just this little, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain from the Wizard of Oz. Well, how do we not pay attention to our judgmental mode of mind? So there's kind of tricks in there. There's quite a number of diffusion ones. singing our difficult thoughts. If you wouldn't probably want to do it during the competition, but you can actually do it at other times. And, that little crack in the system, repeating difficult thoughts like failure down to a single word, saying it fast, 30 seconds, at least once per second, allow the thought here to sort of do that and feel what that feels like, to create a space where you still have the thought, you can see it, but it's not here, it's here. So you've probably come up with some. I'd be interested, Trevor, in what you've come up with as diffusion methods to use with your athletes. But I've named 3 or 4 here, and there's literally hundreds of them in the ACT literature. I teach people how to do it. Like if you had a thought like, that would be bad, adding to that thought, and bad spelled backwards is dab. I mean, it sounds crazy, but what you're trying to do is get a little bit of a separation, enough that you can breathe in some air and show up to the challenge that's right here in front of you, and allow your body, allow your eyes and your eye-hand coordination, all that stuff that you grooved for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of hours. Your mind doesn't know how to do that. When I'm trying to show, excuse me for going on, but I'm trying to show this sometimes in workshops, I'll stand up on stage and I'll say, tell me how to walk. You know how, I want you to tell me. I say, okay, great. Lift up your right foot. I say, awesome. How do I do that? Well, this muscle that's right on top of the thigh here, contract it. Super, wonderful. How do I do that? By now the titters are going through the audience, they're getting long pauses. Your judgmental mind doesn't know how to freaking walk, dude. It's only because you are already walking that I can say, walk over here. You had to go through a trial and error learning process, and toddlers fall down something like about 100 times a day under their little diapered butts while walking 10 football fields. They're called toddlers because they can't even pivot on one foot. They have to rock to turn. So the simplest thing, you learned that way. You didn't learn it with analytic judgmental stuff. And you get people in rehab. The reason why you have those bars on both sides when they have to learn how to walk again after a stroke or something. Yeah, some of it's safety because your center of gravity is higher, you're bigger, you don't want to be followed on your now not diapered butt. But part of it also is people try to learn how to walk using their words, and the freaking legs don't have ears. I mean, I worked in rehab, and literally people shout, move, damn you, to their legs. Their legs are not listening. And that's not how you learned it first. I mean, you didn't read a book about how to swim and then jumped in the water. So some of this bad coaching advice, all focused on form and stuff that works fine when you're early on. Later on, you better be careful. Small amounts. Yes, talk about form. Small amounts. Don't be pulling that language monster fully into, because it doesn't know how to even walk, never mind make a putt.
Yeah, that was, I thought, a brilliant metaphor. I'd almost immediately thought with your hands, if you're trying to do something here and make a swing, your hands don't have ears. So it's kind of handing the responsibility over to that other part of you.
Yeah, and letting the mind, we already have more of these skills than we know. There's a reason why some of this stuff can happen fast, and you've seen it, Trevor, haven't you? Where a little bump, but people can find a groove where they can sort of bring the problem-solving mind to heal, and find a place where you can allow your training to be channeled into this present moment. And part of it is because we don't just have the problem-solving, Wizard of Oz dictator within. We know how to look at a sunset and say, wow, and then not say anything else. We know full well we're not going to increase the experience by saying, yeah, but that cloud should be shaped a little different, God, and it needs a little more blue over there. I mean, you would know to shut up. You just go, wow. And so we got, mindfulness is really wowfulness. It's just bringing this kind of innocent open, the experienced innocence that count, not the ignorant innocence, but the experienced innocence of a person who knows how to analyze, judge, criticize, fear, know how to do all that, and respectfully declining the mind's invitation and just show up into the wow of the moment. I just love your perspective taking thing of, being your kid behind your eyes, hitting that ball. It's awesome. And an example of how you can do something you actually know how to do. There's more to you than, math problems.
Yeah, I mean, it's been astonishing how consistently it's helped, over the last 12 months.
I'm
And
going
it's
to
really made
steal it if it's okay. I'm actually going to steal it because I think it would apply even beyond sports. I think this would help a lot with other kinds of things people need to do, where connecting into the joy of being in the moment is possible through the innocent eyes of how it was before you turned it into a math problem.
We have my full have my full permission.
Awesome.
So Steve, thank you so much for your time. Massively appreciate it. I know a lot of people are going to benefit from this, seeing this conversation. I would like to just recommend one of your recent books. I know you've authored many. But your most recent book, A Liberated Mind, which I can highly recommend. I've read it several times now.
Yeah,
Seems
awesome. Thanks for doing that. And I do think I think it will help a little bit because you can see how many domains. And this is one thing, if I could just finish with the thought, if you're into competitive athletics or something, that's one domain of life. You've got many different domains. What if you can learn something in this domain that would really, really be of use to you in this domain, that will also be of use to you in this domain, in this domain, in this domain? That would be kind of cool.
Yeah.
And that's what ACT brings to the table. And what's happening inside, for example, the Toronto Blue Jays, or in their mental performance team, larger than any other Major League Baseball team, as they get on one page so that they're learning something. If you have an injury, some ridiculous number of Major League ball players go through injuries, something like a quarter of them at any one time are in rehab. Because this is such a high level skill. It's very easy. You're stretching your body. You're asking it to do something that almost doesn't make sense. To snap a curveball over and over and over again, it almost doesn't make sense. Our body's not made to do that. And yet, could you learn something in rehab, let's say, from the OTs and the PTs, not OTs, but PTs, rather, the physical therapists? Can you learn something, when working on grooving your stroke, that when your girlfriend decides to dump you, you'll have some skills to use? So psychological flexibility, and the reason what I'm riffing on here is A Liberated Mind tries to show you and walk through a little bit of the science history and the personal history as how we did the hack that we did over that 40 years. You're talking to an old man who's been doing this a long time. But then how many places in life this applies. And why does that matter? It means if you can learn it here, with a little bit of a bump, you can use it there. You do have to see it, the relevance, and there's a little bump to move it over. But you're learning skills you can use that will be there when your athletic career is over. And when shit happens, excuse my French. So it's worth exploring, and thank you for the reference to the book, because that's my best effort to put in front of just normal people. It's not written for therapists, and it's written for folks, just people. How you can do it and why you should learn how.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much, Steve.